What Heyerdahl left behind, the unspoken ocean. Chapter 1. The first whisper of the waves. The boundless, deep blue expanse of the Pacific Ocean covers more than a third of our planet, stretching across thousands of miles of seemingly empty water. For generations, conventional history has firmly insisted that this massive water barrier kept ancient civilizations isolated, separate, and entirely alone. Academic consensus maintained that the early peoples of South America and the islands of Polynesia lived in complete ignorance of one another, divided by an untamed, hostile wilderness of water. The standard historical narrative claimed that the technology to cross such a distance simply did not exist until European caravels arrived. But the ocean was never a wall. It was an open highway waiting for those who knew how to read its currents. In 1947, a young Norwegian explorer named Thor Heyerdahl looked at the vast global maps and saw a completely different reality. Where others saw an impassable void, he saw a web of connection. He envisioned ancient mariners navigating by the rising and setting of the stars, utilizing the invisible, powerful rivers of the globe long before Columbus ever set sail. Most people know the surface story of his legendary raft, the Kon-Tiki. They know of his physical courage, his survival in the wilderness, and his books that captivated the imagination of millions around the globe. They remember the iconic black and white footage of 6 men defying the entire scientific establishment on a fragile structure built of wood and rope. Yet, beneath the heroic, highly publicized tales of a brave explorer lies a much darker and more intriguing narrative. A close examination of his personal life reveals a story of classified journals, strange encounters in the deep ocean night, and ancient genetic anomalies that conventional history chose to ignore. What Thor Heyerdahl truly found out there, beneath the endless canopy of the southern stars, points to an ancient reality far more complex than his public reports suggested. There are files, observations, and deep misgivings that he chose to hide from the world, leaving behind clues that challenge the very foundation of modern anthropology. Chapter 2. The Green Paradise of Fatu Hiva. In the late 1930s, long before the Kon-Tiki was even a conceptual drawing on paper, Heyerdahl and his young bride traveled to an isolated, volcanic island in the Marquesas archipelago, known as Fatu Hiva. They had consciously abandoned modern European civilization, seeking to live entirely off the land while studying the migration patterns of native flora and fauna. The island was a place of deep, shadowed valleys, sheer basalt cliffs, and absolute isolation from the creeping influence of the modern world. It was a landscape untouched by time, where the past felt tangible. Sitting on the black volcanic sandshores and listening to the island elders tell their ancestral stories by the dying embers of the fire, the first seed of systemic doubt was planted in Heyerdahl's mind. The elders did not speak of ancestors arriving from the west, from the direction of Asia, as the universities claimed. Instead, they spoke of an ancient god-king named Tiki, a divine leader who brought their ancestors to the island from a vast, mountainous land far to the east. To the east, across thousands of miles of open water, against what modern science claimed were impossible winds and currents, lay the rugged coast of Peru. Intrigued, Heyerdahl began exploring the interior of the island, examining the massive stone statues hidden deep within the choking tropical jungle. They did not resemble the ancient art of any known Asian civilization. Instead, they shared an undeniable, precise artistic style with the monoliths of Tiwanaku in the high Andes. As he quietly excavated the island's ancient, overgrown burial sites, he made a discovery that startled him. In his early, handwritten field notes, he recorded finding human skulls that did not match the indigenous Polynesian population. These remains displayed distinct Caucasian cranial structures and unmistakable traces of red hair, suggesting a completely different, forgotten race had ruled these islands long before the current inhabitants arrived. This was information so radical that he completely omitted it from his later, famous publications to protect his scientific credibility. Chapter 3: The Call of the Sun King. When Heyerdahl finally returned to Europe, the continent was on the absolute brink of a devastating global war. Despite the chaos enveloping the modern world, his mind remained completely trapped on that distant island, analyzing the enigmatic expressions of those stone faces. He plunged into the archives, studying the ancient legends of the Incas and the pre-Inca civilizations of South America, searching for a unifying thread. He read about a mysterious, fair-skinned, bearded race of divine beings who had built the great stone cities of the Andes long before the Incas themselves took power. The Incas called their leader Viracocha the sun god, but their older, secret name for him was Kontiki. According to these ancient Andean legends, a catastrophic battle took place near the shores of Lake Titicaca, and Kontiki and his remaining followers were forced to flee down to the Peruvian coast. From there, the legend stated, they vanished into the sunset, sailing out into the Pacific Ocean on massive rafts made of balsa wood. The linguistic and mythological similarities were too precise to be a mere coincidence. You had Tiki on the isolated islands of the Pacific and Kontiki on the high plains of Peru, both associated with the sun, engineering, and the dawn of civilization. The scientific community of the 1940s mocked his theories with aggressive condescension. They stated it was physically impossible to make such a journey, arguing that balsa wood absorbs water rapidly when submerged, meaning any such raft would become waterlogged and sink within a matter of days. They believed the fierce ocean currents would tear the lashed structure apart before it left the coastal shelf. Heyerdahl, however, recognized that modern science often mistakes its own technological limitations for the limitations of the past. He decided to prove them wrong by building a replica raft using only the exact tools, materials, and methods available to the ancients, trusting his life to the natural currents. Yet, behind this grand public scientific experiment lay a deeper, unstated motivation. Heyerdahl was looking for the physical remnants of a lost, forgotten global empire that existed long before our recorded history. Chapter 4. 9 Logs of Balsa Wood. In the crowded, chaotic ports of Peru, Heyerdahl sourced 9 massive logs of balsa wood from the deep, untouched jungles of Ecuador. Following ancient indigenous advice that Western scientists ignored, the logs were cut during a specific phase of the moon when the sap density was ideal for natural water resistance and maximum buoyancy. They were transported to the coast and bound together using only native hemp ropes, without the inclusion of a single metal nail, bolt, or wire. A small, primitive bamboo cabin was constructed on top, thatched with dried banana leaves. They named the vessel Kontiki and painted the stylized face of the Sun King onto the massive main canvas sail. On April 28, 1947, the clumsy-looking raft was towed out into the cold, sweeping waters of the Humboldt Current. 6 men, completely isolated from modern communication, and 1 small parrot drifted into the great unknown, leaving the safety of the modern world behind them. The first few nights were a psychological nightmare of terror. The massive, water-soaked logs groaned and rubbed against each other continuously, sounding like wild animals fighting in the dark. The hemp rope stretched, slipped, and creaked under the immense pressure of the ocean swells. However, as the seawater caused the exterior of the wood to swell, a natural phenomenon occurred. The knots grew tighter, locking the logs into a single, flexible, and cohesive entity that absorbed the ocean's energy rather than fighting it. The skeptics were proven wrong. The balsa wood did not sink. The natural, sticky sap inside the fresh logs actively repelled the saltwater, preserving the inner buoyancy of the wood. The raft did not fight the massive waves. It floated effortlessly over them, moving with the fluid grace of a natural sea creature. They found themselves trapped in a shifting liquid desert, moving westward at the steady speed of a gentle walk. As the days slowly turned into weeks, the crew began to realize that they were not alone in the empty space. The ocean was functioning as an organized, living system, and it seemed to be actively guiding them along a predetermined path. Chapter 5. Shadows in the Bioluminescent Deep. In the middle of the vast Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles away from any continent or modern light source, the night water turns black as polished obsidian, becoming completely indistinguishable from the starry sky above. On the deck of the Kon-Tiki, the lone watchman sat in absolute isolation, surrounded by a heavy, profound silence that few modern humans will ever experience. It was during these hours of total darkness that the boundary between the known world and the unknown began to blur. Without warning, the ocean water would begin to glow from within. Millions of microscopic organisms lit up with a pale, green bioluminescence, turning the sea into a swirling, underwater galaxy that mirrored the heavens. Beneath the fragile balsa logs, massive, unidentifiable shapes began to move through the glowing water. Heyerdahl wrote about these surreal moments in his private diaries with a sense of profound or mixed with a subtle, underlying dread. Huge, glowing spheres, significantly larger than the raft itself, would slowly rise from the deep abyss, cruise alongside the logs for hours, and then silently sink back into the dark. They frequently encountered the legendary whale shark, a gentle monster of the deep that circled them closely, its massive mouth wide enough to swallow their small craft. Yet, there were other encounters that never made it into his popular books or nature documentaries. In the dead of winter nights, strange, rhythmic metallic tapping sounds were heard vibrating through the bottom of the logs, sounding like an intentional code. Unexplained, localized lights appeared to rise directly out of the deep ocean, hovering near the surface of the water before vanishing at incredible speed. Heyerdahl brushed these phenomena off as unknown marine life in his popular texts to avoid being labeled an eccentric or a madman by his academic peers. However, in his private communications with naval intelligence officers after the voyage, he asked very specific questions about underwater anomalies and unexplained magnetic deviations in that specific quadrant of the Pacific. Questions that were quickly classified and hidden from the public view. Chapter 6. The Secret Geography of the Currents. After 101 intense days at sea, having traveled over 4,000 miles across the open ocean, the lookout on the Kon-Tiki finally spotted land. They crashed violently into the sharp coral reef of Roroya Atoll in the Tuamotu Islands, surviving the impact and proving their point. The expedition was a resounding success, capturing the front pages of newspapers worldwide. Heyerdahl had successfully proven that ancient South Americans could have easily colonized Polynesia using primitive, pre-industrial technology. Despite the undeniable physical proof of the journey, the scientific community remained largely unconvinced. Academics argued that while it was technically possible to drift one way due to the prevailing winds, It did not mean it actually happened in antiquity, because the wind and surface currents only flow from east to west. They asked a critical question: how could any ancient voyager ever return to South America against such forces? Heyerdahl knew the answer, but he intentionally held back the full scope of his findings. He had discovered during the voyage that the ocean is not a simple, one-way conveyor belt. Deep beneath the surface currents, hidden from modern sight, there are massive, powerful countercurrents that flow in the exact opposite direction. An experienced ancient sailor, using heavy, retractable centerboards lowered deep between the logs, could capture these submerged rivers and effectively sail against the wind. Heyerdahl found definitive evidence that ancient navigators possessed a sophisticated understanding of this secret geography. They kept complex maps, not drawn on paper or parchment, but memorized through sacred songs, star paths, and delicate, flexible stick charts that represented wave intersection points. He began to suspect that the ancient maritime network was far more advanced and organized than modern history dared to admit. It was an invisible network that connected Egypt, South America, and the isolated islands of the Pacific into a single, global tapestry of prehistoric seafaring knowledge that was lost when the modern era began. Chapter 7: The Secrets of Easter Island. To find the definitive, undeniable proof of this global connection, Heyerdahl directed his attention toward the loneliest piece of inhabited land on Earth, Rapa Nui, commonly known as Easter Island. This tiny speck of volcanic rock, isolated in the vastness of the southeastern Pacific, is famous worldwide for its giant, brooding stone statues called moai. The fundamental questions had remained unanswered for centuries. Who built them? How were they transported across the rugged terrain? And why do their artistic features look so entirely unique compared to other Polynesian art? Heyerdahl arrived on the island with a full archaeological team, determined to dig beneath the surface narrative. He spent months systematically excavating the soil around the statues, making a discovery that shocked the world. The statues were not just disembodied heads. They possessed massive, fully formed stone bodies buried deep underground, covered by centuries of naturally shifting soil, silt, and dust. More importantly, on the buried chests of these statues, he uncovered faint, heavily eroded carvings of ancient reed ships equipped with sails, ships that looked completely identical to those used in ancient Peru and depicted on the walls of ancient Egypt. He spent his evenings speaking with the hereditary island guardians, the direct descendants of the original inhabitants. They told him that the statues did not walk across the island by human muscle power alone. They were moved by a mysterious spiritual energy called mana, commanded by an elite race of ancient people known as the Long Years. According to local history, the Long Years were a physically distinct group who kept their identity and lineage strictly separate, until a tragic, violent civil war wiped them out completely. Heyerdahl dug deeper into the forbidden caves of the island, discovering hidden underground chambers filled with small, bizarre stone sculptures that depicted non-human facial features, strange star constellations, and unknown hybrid creatures. He photographed them all, but only a small fraction of those disturbing images were ever released to the general public. He realized that Easter Island was not an isolated anomaly, but an ancient outpost, a sacred crossroads of a global civilization that had been systematically erased from memory. Chapter 8: The Reed Ships of the Pharaohs. As the years passed and his global fame grew, Heyerdahl's theories became even grander and increasingly controversial to mainstream academia. He shifted his geographical focus from the waters of the Pacific to the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. He had noticed that the ancient pyramid-building cultures of Egypt and Mesopotamia shared striking, undeniable similarities with the pyramid-building civilizations of Mexico and Peru. The architectural geometry, the complex solar calendars, and the intricate mummification techniques were far too similar to be explained away as mere coincidence or parallel evolution. In 1969, he commissioned the construction of the Ra, a ship made entirely of local papyrus reeds, built strictly according to ancient Egyptian wall paintings and tomb reliefs. He wanted to prove a radical concept, that Egyptian mariners possessed the capability to cross the Atlantic Ocean thousands of years before the dawn of modern history. The first attempt ended in near disaster as the reed ship broke apart in the rough Atlantic waves just short of its destination. This failure occurred because modern shipbuilders had made a slight modification to the design, ignoring a specific rope tension technique found in the original Egyptian drawings. Heyerdahl did not give up. A year later, he built the Ra II, adhering strictly and unconditionally to the ancient construction techniques, and successfully crossed the ocean, arriving safely in the Caribbean. The connection was now mathematically and physically proven. The Atlantic, like the Pacific, was a viable trade highway. This success sparked an even more profound and unsettling question. If these ancient cultures were all connected by an elite group of ocean-going navigators, who were these original mariners, and where did they originate? Heyerdahl began searching for a single mother culture, a missing link in the human story. He began to suspect that an advanced, maritime-based civilization had existed during the last ice age, a civilization that was completely destroyed by a sudden, global cataclysm, leaving only fragments of its advanced knowledge scattered across the globe, carefully guarded by the high priests of Egypt and the divine kings of Peru. Chapter 9. The Burning of the Tigris. In 1977, Heyerdahl constructed his final great experimental ship, which he named the Tigris. It was a massive reed vessel built in the marshes of Iraq, designed specifically to retrace the ancient sea trade routes of the Sumerians. He sailed the fragile craft down the Persian Gulf, out into the vast Indian Ocean, and toward the shores of Pakistan and Africa. The voyage was an absolute triumph of experimental archaeology, proving beyond a doubt that the ancient world was deeply interconnected by maritime trade long before the rise of classical Greece or the Roman Empire. The ancient world was closer than anyone had dared to imagine. However, this historic journey ended in a profound, dramatic tragedy. When the Tigris reached the mouth of the Red Sea, they were abruptly forbidden to land anywhere due to intense, modern military conflicts and blockades raging in the region. The modern world, with its artificial borders, its ideological wars, and its political divisions, had completely blocked the ancient highway that had remained open for millennia. In a powerful, solemn act of political and philosophical protest, Heyerdahl and his international crew decided to burn the Tigris to the waterline. As the massive reed ship went up in a towering wall of flames, lighting up the night sky over the African coast, Heyerdahl issued an open, urgent letter to the United Nations. He warned that modern humanity was losing its collective way, forgetting that we all share a common, unified heritage connected by the very oceans we now divide, weaponize, and pollute. Yet, those who were closest to the explorer at the time whispered that there was another, far more secret reason for the fire. The Tigris had carried unique artifacts and extensive notebooks from his recent, unpublicized excavations along the Indus Valley, material that directly challenged the modern, approved narrative of how human civilization began. By burning the ship down to the waterline, Heyerdahl ensured those dangerous secrets stayed protected, buried forever in the deep ocean, far away from political manipulation and academic censorship. Chapter 10. The Last Horizon. Thor Heyerdahl passed away quietly in the spring of 2002, surrounded by the peaceful, sun-drenched hills of Colomitri in Italy. Throughout his long, turbulent life, he was called a hero, a visionary, a dangerous rebel, and a hopeless romantic. He had dared to challenge the cold, rigid, and bureaucratic walls of academic history, forcing the world to look at the oceans not as empty spaces, but with a renewed sense of profound wonder. In his final years, completely hidden from the media spotlight, he was actively working on a highly controversial project in Azov, Russia, searching for the literal roots of the ancient Nordic gods. Based on his analysis of ancient texts, he believed that Odin was not a mythical, fictional figure, but a real, historical king who migrated from the Black Sea region to Scandinavia centuries ago. Once again, he was looking for the deep, hidden connections that mainstream science preferred to deny. He had spent his entire life showing that our ancestors were not primitive, isolated tribes trapped on their respective continents, but bold, brilliant explorers who braved the endless blue with nothing but wood, hemp rope, and the alignment of the stars to guide them. The iconic image of the Kon-Tiki remains an enduring symbol of that eternal human quest for truth. The balsa logs have long since stopped rocking on the ocean swells, yet the questions they raised remain unanswered. The raft carried men toward distant, unknown islands under the exact same stars that guide our world today. The ocean still holds its secrets, hiding them deep beneath the dark, cold, and silent waves where human eyes rarely look. Some stories are meant to be written in standardized history books, approved by committees and taught in schools, and some stories are meant to be left behind, resting forever in the quiet, undisturbed depths of the sea.